Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Buffalo Bills Maybe Next Year, the podcast where you wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat going 466 yards. That happened to me, at least, anyway. My name is Paul.
And I'm Scott.
And Frank.
I'm Frank.
Frank, he's here somewhere. He's here in spirit. He did give a beautiful, I think it was about a 16, 17-minute MP3 recording that we might figure out how to splice into this. We might figure out how to post it. Or dear Lord knows how we'll end up getting you all of our information about this game. But I can guarantee you that we will get this out there to you because this was an important game to talk about. And unfortunately, not as pleasant a discussion as we were hoping to have. Although, to our credit, I believe all three of us did pick the Patriots in this game. I don't remember what Frank did specifically. But we can always go back and look at that. So I figure, I always like to, when the times I kind of lead this, which is about 3 out of every 102 podcasts, I would say, based on the numbers. I tend to like to kick it over to Scott for his opinion. My initial thought, Scott, is I kick it over to you. Tom Brady's very good. Doesn't really surprise me. The Bills' offensive line is highly suspect. Color me shocked. But 506 yards of offense for the Patriots against this allegedly elite defense. Are you kidding me? Off to you.
See, now there's a very interesting question, Paul, because I think it's a very interesting frame of reference in which you've chosen is yards. Because what I did is I listened to the game live on Sunday because I did not have the opportunity to watch it, and then I watched it on replay today, and I had some time to think during my watchings, and I did some numbers. And if you say that if you took the 6 New England drives that started on the New England 35 or better, they scored 24 points on those drives. If you take the other 7 drives where they did not start on the New England 30, where they were starting behind the New England 35,
right,
they scored 16 points. So if you were to average, and again, rose-colored glasses fully on here, I realize we're cutting the numbers so that it makes the Bills' defense look better than it is. But if you were to average if you were to average the rest of those drives to 2.3 points per drive, which you would do is if you were taking that 35-yard drive start, then you would end up with the Patriots only scoring 29 points. And I think most of the time, if you could say that you held Tom Brady to 29 points, you would be pretty pleased with yourself. And in this game, it would technically be a win. Now, obviously, things are much different. Obviously, that's not what happened. Obviously, I'm cooking the numbers a little bit. I ran the numbers. If you took it from if you were starting at the New England 50-yard line or you're starting at midfield, it does change things a little bit. The Patriots end up scoring basically almost 3 points on the rest of their drives, and they end up with 38 points. So it's a somewhat similar kind of number. But I would say that ultimately, yeah, the Bills' defense definitely had some key breakdowns. I mean, obviously, the defensive line, the plan of having the 4 guys up front on the defensive line get pressure enough on Brady to bring him down did not work for most of the game. That was not something that was capable of working given how quickly Brady was going to get rid of the ball. I think having Bradham, who's a very good linebacker and really a very good coverage linebacker, I think he had a bad game. I think it's entirely possible that that's just a bad matchup for him with Dion Lewis, who's clearly very good at catching the ball out of the backfield on wheel routes. I think there were some mental mistakes, which we can get to more into later when we talk about penalties and such. But ultimately, the defense also did some good things. I mean, I think they did get to Brady a couple times. They did force 2 turnovers, and Brady is really good. So, I think when I was listening to Frank's stuff as well, and I think, I'm not as terrified by what happened in this game as maybe I would have been if you had told me this is what happened at the outset. But, maybe there's much to be seen. I mean, New England barely ran the ball. They, as the radio guys were talking about it, it was 15, 16 times maybe that they ran the ball out of 75 or 80 plays. Some of that I think is probably New England deciding that they had a higher chance of succeeding on their short passing plays than on their short running plays, but maybe that would change in a tighter game. Maybe they feel like they'd run the ball a little bit more. But certainly a disappointing performance for the defense, but I also think that it's maybe, to be fair, you got put in some bad situations by their offense and their special teams frequently as well.
They did, and Frank had touched upon that too. I think it's interesting the yards we can take so many ways. Almost the way I look at yards is they picked up 506 yards despite having short fields all those times. So they didn't even have opportunities to pick up big yards when they had, 2 touchdown drives starting inside the Bills' 30. So that was less than 60 yards leading to,
Sure.
14 points or whatever it was. But, you also make the valid point about some of the good things the Bills defense did. And largely that's because when Brady is going to move the ball no matter what. But if you're pinning them at the 17, 18 yard line, they pick up a 50-yard drive, they're probably not going to get any points out of that. Or maybe they settle for a long field goal try. So, the defense, they did some good things. I just think when you've allowed the most passing yards in franchise history. And think about some of the terrible defenses this team has had just since we've been watching together over the last 10 years. This defense is nowhere near as bad as some of those, or as bad as the defenses of the early and mid 80s before we were really fans of this team. And yet they just gave all that up. Did they give it up to arguably the best quarterback in NFL history? Yes. But still distressing to me that a team that wants to be considered elite did give up all those yards. Frank blames the slipping of bath salts into the Gatorade, for some of the dumb moves, taking the bait with Edelman. He specifically referenced Aaron Williams taking dumb penalty after dumb penalty there. 3 penalties on an onside kick. Nigel Bradham, Duke Williams not being on the same page in the end zone. When you brought up Bradham too, I think, and I'm going to pronounce it both Bradham and Bradham, just because one of them's bound to be correct.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I want to mention with Bradham, he did have a rough day covering Deion Lewis, who I like to call Deion Warwick, or Deion Ferris for those of you who like Arrested Development. The past New England handler last drive, Bradham had covered perfectly. He was right in position. He ended up taking a pass interference call. If he had turned around, that's an interception. The Bills have the ball down by 5 with 3 minutes left in a timeout. And boy, what a huge difference that would have made if he just takes that extra step. That's the difference between a linebacker who's going to make, about $3.5 million a year in free agency, and a linebacker who's going to make $6 million a year in free agency. And hopefully that's what the coaches are telling Bradham, finish the play. You did such a good job sticking with this guy, even though it might not be your role. But you had a rough game, and this is one area you could have made up for all of it. So, you bring up about there were some good things that the defense did. It's just so difficult for me to see those good things in the context of giving up all of that yardage. And again, it was the second most yards Brady's ever passed for. So it is Tom Brady. It's an anomaly even for him. He'd only had a comparable game to this once in his illustrious career. So I think the defense has to shake off the cobwebs a little bit. Well, with that in mind, we can talk more about this when we go into what this means in the grand scheme of the season, or particularly the next Patriots game. Going on to some general impressions of the game, and moving to the offensive side of the ball as well as special teams. What stood out for you in that regard?
So there were two things that I was going to kind of talk about. One was, and this is something that, again, I hate to harp on it because, regular listeners are probably tired of me hearing about it. But the idea that we're going to have this ground and pound offense that is going to dominate time of possession, run the ball down people's throats, with an offensive line in which we have invested practically nothing. I mean, Cordy Glenn, 2nd round pick, yes. Eric Wood, a 1st rounder, but from 8 or 9 years ago. John Miller, a 3rd rounder. Okay, he's good for a rookie, but he also got torched a couple times. Incognito, someone who was on the scrap heap. Seantrell Henderson, undrafted free agent.
Right, and hilarious. Which one of the veteran players are they paying the least amount of money? That's the trivia question. I'll give you a hint. His name rhymes with Bincognito.
I was going to say, I mean, he was, he did have the silent embargo from the owners, so I'm sure we probably got him for a song.
And he was making near the league minimum, and he was not only the best offensive lineman by far on the field, excuse me, he graded out as the 2nd best guard overall in the NFL last week.
Really?
At least in the run game he was. So, that says a lot with the rest of that line.
Okay.
Anyway, all right, all yours. Sorry to jump in.
I'm unaware of that. That was a good good pull because I definitely saw Incognito get blown up on at least one pass play, and maybe that's what I was thinking of. But so obviously, I think we got some decent production out of the run game. It didn't sound as much as it was when I was listening to when I was watching. We ended up getting a little bit more. So maybe I'm being a little too hard on him, but I think the offense in general was much more productive when we were more capable and more willing to mix things up, be unpredictable, not so much run, 1, 2, 3 up the middle kind of, and then throw on third, putting, the Patriots pass rush in an obvious kind of pass rushing situation. But obviously the O-line's pass blocking was simply terrible. I mean, Cordy Glenn, I would have to say that's probably his worst game ever. I mean, that's a good thing.
He was hideous, and he had some bad games last year, but
yeah, I mean, that's a good thing in that hopefully that's the worst game we'll ever see Cordy again play, and he does not continue to get worse. Because if he gets much worse, he's going to get benched, and we can put freaking Quanjo in there because that was atrocious. So the concern so that the game planning is one thing. I'm not sure that was the correct game plan as much, trying to run as much up the middle. I'm surprised we didn't have as many options. Some people have talked about bootlegs and rolling them out. I think that's fair. But yeah, the offensive line, again, this is the way we structured the team, that we're going to be this ground and pound team. If we're going to be depending on the offensive line to open holes in the run game, it's going to be difficult. Now, again, they didn't do a terrible job on Sunday, but I would also say New England does not have a particularly great run defense. I mean, they have an okay run defense, especially with the linebackers, but without Wilfork, it's a different team. And then I was going to talk about penalties and mental mistakes. Do you want to respond on offense first? Or?
Yeah. I'll talk about offense for a bit, and then we'll get into the penalties because Frank had some good feedback on that too. One of my tweets on Sunday during the game was, being the optimist league, the Bills have some evidence showing Cordy Glenn is not worth top 10 tackle money, so they can save some cash for other players.
That was funny. Yeah.
It's one of those things where they talk about, what quarterbacks make, and this is marked for quarterbacks. Like, you look at the money Tannehill makes, and we can get into that on another date, but we are playing him this week. It's an obscene amount of money that takes up a ton of cap room that is for a guy who's not even the argument for the top 12 players at his position in the league. And I've went down position by position. The offense, I was surprised not to see a little more read option, take advantage of Taylor's skills. I think they were a little bit too reactive to Belichick's game plan on defense, whereas Belichick is just going to attack your weaknesses, and he knew what the Bills were. It was very similar. It was Super Bowl 25-ish, except the Bills did not have a quarterback like Jim Kelly or receivers. Well, they do have some really good receivers on this team, but they put Taylor back there with a terrible offensive line, and they just said, okay, McCoy's going to get his yards, Carlos Williams will get his yards, but you're going to throw the ball, and the Bills threw the ball too much. And then what happens? You inevitably get behind the 8 ball, you give up 8 sacks, your team falls way behind, and then you've got to pass more. When your run game has actually been fairly good to that point. At the end of the game, we can't say, the Patriots let their foot off the gas a little bit. That's why the Bills scored the first 19 points of the fourth quarter. But I don't know if I agree with that. I think the Bills offense did figure some things out. The Patriots defense was as aggressive in the fourth quarter as they were previously. I haven't seen the blitz numbers to back that up, but I was watching the game and seeing the people come free, seeing the players come free. And yet he stood in there when he had to. He made people miss, but then he did revert to some bad habits points, which led to interceptions and near interceptions and incompletions. So it was what concerns me a bit is New England is a good defense. They are not a great defense. And yet they largely had the Bills mastered for 3 quarters, and we're about to face one of the toughest defenses we'll face this year coming up next week. But what can the team learn from this as far as what they need to do better and what they see when they go on film? And again, the biggest concern for me still remains that offensive line, because you can only work around that weakness so much. So on the penalties. Oh, go ahead, Scott. Sorry.
I know we don't have a ton of time. We have a lot to talk about, but it feels like we're almost talking past each other. I felt like they were too willing to try and stick to the run and not pass enough. It seems like you feel the exact opposite, that we were too quick to give up on the run and pass too early. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is. Wow. I missed that. I did miss that.
You're
in
just
your
not
analysis.
listening.
And I was listening closely. As you know, I've got nowhere else to be right now. I'm just here.
Well, that is interesting that we both, so maybe they passed and ran the exact same percentage that they should have, given that two reasonable people disagree. So clearly we're both wrong, and they did exactly the right balance that Tyrod just needs to play better. It could be just that simple.
Right. And we should actually do a post recap and look at the ratios and figure it out on Facebook and Twitter. Like, all right, how was the run pass ratio, and what do other people think about it? But yeah, we'll move along and
I'll tell you, we ran the ball 27 times, not counting 5 Tyrod Taylor rushes. At least one of those was designed, but I'm not sure that many. And then 30 passes. So really, I mean, considering that we were trailing for 3/4 of the game, that's probably about as 50-50 as you would expect, honestly. So,
right.
Okay. And then, and talking about, Frank got into the penalties and mental mistakes a little bit. And, he said that penalties, good teams can have penalties and it doesn't matter, as he pointed out with 3 of the 4 championship game participants last year leading the league in penalties. But at the same time, I would say that it wasn't as much the penalties that bothered me. It was just simply the mental mistakes. And I can put that a little bit on the coaching staff, whether it's them getting them too hyped up or them not realizing that maybe their emotions are riding too high. Obviously, they did take Aaron Williams out.
And to the staff's credit, they did admit that, or Rex Ryan admitted it at least on Monday.
Yeah, he did, and I think that's good, and I think that's hopefully, again, this is all a new coaching staff for the most part, and a lot of new players on this team to a certain extent, so at least on offense. So, some of that is going to be on them, whether it's Taylor and, make passes and throwing the ball, high passes, making me think that he's a little jazzed up. He's putting a little too much on the ball. Paul pointed out some of the real boneheaded penalties on, 3 on the onside kick. We had 3 personal fouls on special teams after the plays were over. In addition to the amount of holding and blocking the backs that we normally have, has some great returns nullified by those. Now, those are usually effort plays when it's holding or blocking the back, but personal fouls are just personal fouls. It's just dumb, including the one on the bench, which, again, does not get called a lot. That was a second-year ref. He needs to freaking man up, as far as I'm concerned. But that doesn't change the fact that I do think the emotions got a little out of hand. And, yeah, I don't think the Bills need to be, overly concerned about penalties when it's holdings, when it's effort calls, when it's doing it because you feel like you're getting beat. But obviously don't just try not to get beat. But, too much lack of focus is going to be an issue going forward.
Right. And I made that same point when I was live tweeting on the game, is that they weren't the effort penalties you accept. Like, okay, the offensive line holds because they're not very good and they need to contain the defensive line, and maybe they're going to get caught now and then. But Duke Williams started off the pointless penalties. Aaron Williams continued it. Again, Frank used the term bath salts when he was giving his audio summary of the game. There's just lack of focus becomes the big issue. And Kyle Williams was the one who noted that they came in so hyped up that they just did. He had a much better quote on it, which of course I don't have in front of me, but he broke it down very intelligently to explain how, that New England feasts off that lack of focus. And they did.
Very good point.
And that's why you take all those penalties and you figure, 506 yards in offense for New England, plus 540 yards or 540 yards, 140 yards in penalties. You're talking about nearly 700 yards, either offensively or defensively, you're handing to the other team. And that's just you can't do that against a defending Super Bowl champion who's probably going to be as good in the regular season this year as they have been in previous years, and who has owned the NFL as much as any single team can own it over the last decade and a half. And if you want to progress as a franchise, you have to learn to not do those things. And I think there's one other point I wanted to mention here, which I think relates to one of our comments. I guess we can put off this comment till later. But there's just no excuse to do some of those things. So if John Miller has to hold against Sue next week, I'm going to shake my head. I'm going to be frustrated. I'm like, he's still doing better than me against Sue. So, I can't really fault him there.
This is
but they've got to clean that up, or else it's going to be a huge issue going forward. And we don't have it on our agenda. Do we want to talk about Aaron Williams a little bit, both his game as well as the injury?
I mean, Frank talked about him. I know. I think. I guess
I
I would
believe
say.
he actually dropped cervix in there, Frank.
Yeah, he
Somehow
did.
he found a way to put a cervix into a podcast on football. But yeah, that's
Man.
another story. That's just me shaking my head at Frank.
I think
Anyway,
the only thing I'll say is, obviously, I just hope he gets better. I hope he does not come to the Dolphins on Sunday because, frankly, it's not worth it to rush back, even if he is. Obviously, this is one of those things where it's like, to a certain extent. I mean, obviously, they can be swelling that can lead to, partial paralysis, and obviously, I'm sure he's mentally not quite in it. Even if he was, 100% healthy, still not sure I'd want him to go down to Miami. I feel like take another week off, spend it at home with the family, and concentrate on making sure that you're mentally prepared. And after that, suit up and head back out there.
right. And with the next game at home too, after Miami, just have him stay here. Don't worry about travel. Travel tends to exacerbate these sorts of things.
Sure.
And Rex Ryan did even say him playing was a stretch, was the quote. So, hopefully he doesn't play. I agree. I think he had a very rough game in every regard. He didn't cover particularly well. He made mistakes. There were some blown coverages with, his brother Duke Williams. I know they're not brothers. And Nigel Braden, which led to the first touchdown. But Aaron had the penalties. He had bad coverage a lot of the day. And then he had the unfortunate. He did get benched for those things, and then he did have the unfortunate injury. And I think, good young player, is to quote Dick Duran, who said everyone was a good young player. But I think he really is. He got rewarded with a decent contract. But I think in the grand scheme of things, he needs a game like this to be like, okay, I've got to get better focus. I've got to make sure I'm not just playing in the moment, but that I am remembering everything I've practiced and how that preparation is going to come into this game. And I'd agree. I think it might be doing some good in all sorts of ways to have off this week. So as we should we do 3 stars first, or should we look at the questions on this game? Why don't we do 3 stars first, and then we'll finish off the questions on the game?
Yeah. So obviously, plenty of potential Patriots in your 3 stars lineup tonight. I'm gonna give the honorable mention to a Mr. Tom Brady. And by the way,
how does he get an honorable mention for a near historic?
Because I don't like him. I don't like him.
Okay.
I don't care for him. I don't like the cut of his jib. Thank you very much.
Fair enough.
He also, I would say that he missed a fair amount of receivers who were wide open. I mean, the game would not have been nearly. There would have been no last second Bills potential for a Bills comeback had he successfully hit. I think it was Edelman on that 4th down. When as Frank pointed out, when they were going for the throat in the 4th quarter, if he hits that pass, I mean, it's a touchdown, and it is truly game over at that point.
Right. Which, by the way, we didn't really talk about that, but wasn't that crazy that he was still putting the pedal to the metal in the 4th quarter, Belichick and Brady, and that ended up almost costing them that could have cost them the game very well. The Bills had made just one more play.
That was going through my mind on Sunday. I was like, just keep. I mean, and the radio guys were calling it out, like, and I forget who's the color guy. Is it Kelso?
Mark Kelso, correct?
Yeah, he was like, oh, why not? You just keep throwing it. I mean, from their perspective, possession passing is just as good as running it, and blah blah blah. And I'm like, there's lots of reasons why you don't want to keep passing.
Yes, like a Jerry Hughes strip sack, for example.
Exactly, or incompletions that stop the clock, or not being able to complete the ball on 4th down and turning the ball over. Like, there's a variety of things, or Tom Brady getting hurt. Any number of bad things can happen when you keep throwing the ball, and many of them did on Sunday. And so, yeah, Tom Brady gets the honorable mention. Also, he's cheating, so there's that. So that kind of limits his ceiling. So your 3rd star then becomes LaShawn McCoy. And I also debated giving one to Dion Lewis. As usual, the nameless Patriots running back who ends up with 150 plus yards from scrimmage and a touchdown or 2. But
right.
Again,
though, to be fair, you and I could have ended up with about 120 in that offense with Brady and Gronk.
Yeah, I think that is part of it, and that's why it's hard to pick New England skill position players, because again, they can put pretty much anybody in there. Though I will say the wheel routes on Bradham were pretty lethal, and that's very tough to cover. But LaShawn definitely was the bright spot. I mean, I think again, listening, I did not realize how effective he was, making something out of nothing frequently bailing out Tyrod. He had at least one 20-yard run that was called back because of a hold. Picking up fumbles. Obviously he's a good player. I think this is the kind of game that I was hoping that we would get out of him. I wasn't sure that we would, given how poor the offensive line can play from time to time. But great job overall for LeSean. So he gets the 3rd star. Your 2nd star goes to the main victimizer of Cordy Glenn, Chandler Jones, who, again, the Patriots still have some good defenders.
Right. I'm going to call him Hall of Famer Chandler Jones after that game. That was just every play I was hearing his name in some regard.
Yeah, no, again, the stats were, 6 total tackles, 3 sacks, 4 QB hits. They weren't anything particularly special, but, obviously given how, the Bills were attempting to pass the ball, him collapsing the pocket. Really their defensive line did a pretty good job, but I think Chandler Jones is really the one who was putting the most pressure. A relatively quiet game from our old nemesis, Rob Ninkovich, who apparently has lost a step as he's kind of gotten up in age a little bit.
It happens even to the best Mankoviches in league history.
And then I'm going to give the 1st star to Gronk because 7 catches, 113 yards and touchdown. I would say that, again, he is, at this point, obviously Brady is irreplaceable. But again, nobody likes him. I don't really like Gronk either, but I feel like Gronk is going to be someone who's going to bother us much longer than Tom Brady will, because Brady at the most has what?
25 years left, maybe.
I was going to say
that's it.
It's kind of asking for it. Yeah, unfortunately, but Gronk is like 26. So the fact that we can't cover him, again, we didn't even do a bad job. I think we did an okay job, but he still had 7 catches for 113 yards and a touchdown. So
there was what do you do against him? Like, I'm kind of like, they seemed to have a good game plan. They had Lawson and linebackers covering him short where they could. They had others covering him deep, but one missed assignment or one move that he makes or just one, what the heck do you do? He caught it anyway. He's a tight end that I would pay Charles Clay money to have on my team.
I feel like I'd take a straight up trade Rob Gronkowski for Charles Clay. I think I'd make that trade.
I think you, me, and everyone with the New England Patriots would make that trade. So, that was I can't disagree with any of your stars other than, of course, I would elevate Brady because I don't disqualify him for the cheating and not liking him, even though he cheated and I don't like him. But regardless of that, it was. It was a tough game to watch. It was great that they did not, give up at all. They really did fight till the bitter end. I liked some of the things I saw on offense. I liked some of the big plays they made on defense, as Frank pointed out in his comments as well. He said that, Brady was getting out under 2 seconds. He was wrong. I will correct Frank. He was getting it down averaging 2.00 seconds. So it wasn't under 2 seconds, mind you. It was 2 seconds exactly per whatever stores I looked that up in, which I can't remember. But basically, Frank said the defensive line had no chance. That was the case much of the game, but then that puts the onus on those guys in coverage to stay with them longer. So I think really you got to look at the guys who are covering and say, well, this is where they fail and this is where they're going to have to step up in coming weeks. As far as comments related to this game, Tom had noted, there's lots of work to do. I would agree. I think we've covered some of those things they've got to work on. The offensive line, again, being the scariest to me because I don't think that's an issue that's going away. We could reach the playoffs while losing to the Pats twice. Yeah, absolutely we could. You look at the rest of the schedule, the Bills could legitimately, before they face the Pats again, they could legitimately win the next 7. They could lose a bunch of those too, but I think they could legitimately win the next 7, go into that game 8-1, and then all of a sudden be 8-2. I don't think that's going to happen, but
I think I have my 10-6 prediction for the year. I had them losing both Pats games. I think it's just, and again, we can just, we'll get to the NFC East a little later, given the trade, but it's a smoking hole in the ground right now in the NFC East. So that might be 4 wins right there.
Yep. Brian on Facebook and I were debating the Watkins miss. I think we're actually more on the same page than we thought we were as I reread our discussion. I was not questioning the decision to make the throw. I think he was questioning the decision to make the throw a little more, but I think we both agreed that it was an inaccurate throw to Watkins, and that could have been a 25, 30-yard play. All of a sudden, you're looking at a shade over a minute left. You only got 50 yards to go, which was
that was
that
a
play was
small
there.
window, though. He was fitting it in though. Like there was a guy in front and a guy behind and a guy trailing. Like
Oh yeah, it's a hard throw, but
it was in the ballpark. I think Sammy should have got it, just for my perspective.
Right. As far as trying to make that throw, my thought is, if not then, when? That's a situation where you try to make that throw because it is truly desperation time.
Yeah.
Brian Punt did note, it's a bit of a reality check for the team. It certainly is. Grant and I went into some discussion on the last play. And again, thank you for all of you who talked to me during the game. It's good to have the company and go through it. Jasmine Jeter and I exchanged some good discussion.
Brian also brought up on the other post, Paul, I don't know if you saw it, what cheating would we like to see the Bills incorporate into their game planning? So my thought, it's difficult because, of course, we don't know the NFL rule book like, Nosferatu Belichick over there. So it's difficult for me to find on page 472 of the NFL game manual where it says that you're allowed to bury landmines on the opposing sideline. Without, well, it doesn't say that we can't do it, so fail to see how that's relevant, but okay. So not having known the entire playbook, I am very much in favor of full-on grease baths for Tyrod Taylor, Sammy, Percy, most of the skill position players, except for maybe their hands, because I guess they're going to need the hands, right? Probably.
Yeah, yep.
But at
hands
least
are necessary.
Just get, nice couple big sticks of butter or country crock or something and just smear them down real good and just kind of make them a little bit slipperier going forward. I think that's kind of I think that would be a little bit hard to pick up for the refs because obviously there's cheating and then there's what is cheating is something that you might theoretically be able to get away with. That would be a little hard to prove. I think if you were to you can't say Mario brings a knife onto the field and stabs Tom Brady. He's gonna get called for that. That's not cheating. I mean, it's
right.
illegal.
I think murder is at least 15 yards. I think it's straight up 15 too. It's not even one of those where was it manslaughter? That might be a 5-yard deal. I think it's straight up 15 yards.
Running into versus roughing the kicker is manslaughter and murder.
Which, by the way, we
meditated
roughing the kicker call during the game. I have no idea what the distinction is. I mean, you have the extreme.
Well, if the Patriots are doing it, it's never a penalty.
Right.
If the Patriots are doing it, it's never a penalty.
Right. That should be how I remember it. Because if I understand, if you your hip accidentally grazes him, that's easy right into the kicker. If you spear him like Bill Goldberg, that's obviously roughing the kicker. But there's a lot of in between there. I'd like to know the definition of. And Brian, in his post-game analysis, did note, the defense isn't as good as we thought it was. Again, it's one game. We've got to keep that in mind. But I do think there is too much hype around this. I agree with him there. Taylor had some good moments, and he had some moments where he was indecisive. We talked about that. And maybe we do look at changing up. I say we. It's the Bills who might have to look up to changing up the blocking schemes. I will say that's the best thing about facing Belichick in week 2. It really exposes all your weaknesses as a team. Right off the bat, and you can kind of work to correct the ones you can correct, or at least minimize the impact of, things like a weak offensive line.
Yep.
Also on Facebook, we do want to give a shout out. Sioux City, what's up, Sioux City, which is Iowa, if I'm correct, right? Please don't tell me I screwed up the state on that. Thank God. Yes. Oh, and it says right in the post, Sioux City, Iowa. And Josh Purnell, thanks for listening. It's great to have you here. He notes a failure to use the run game more after the first drive is what cost us the game. So
clearly he agrees with you.
On my side of that, yeah. I thought we had opportunities to run. We should have done more, should have controlled the clock. The offensive line was clearly not pass blocking. But again, let's hope we can pound it down the Finns' throat. I agree. I'd
say the problem is that arguably I would say the Finns' run defense is arguably better than the Pats.
Yeah, and I would too, because he asked, do you think we can run better on the Finns' D? Can we? Possibly. Do I think we will? Probably not, just because they have such a good front seven overall. It's going to be tough to. I mean, they don't have Chandler Jones, but they do have Sue. They've got a lot of other talented players up there. So, that's my take on that. Did we fully cover the Patriots game here? And I act like it was a little bit more than half of our agenda, and took us 40 minutes to discuss it. So
yeah, that did go a little long. I mean, do we want to do thoughts on what it means for the season? I have one more thing on Taylor, and I can put it in there.
Yes, let's do that. And why don't we kick it over to you, and then I'll give my impression on that one too.
So I think I'll keep this relatively short. Again, I kind of hit at it a little earlier. I think the Bills can be a good team, a plus 500 team, a playoff team, and still lose to the Patriots twice. However, as Frank kind of hit at it in his notes, but basically, I do still think that you have to build your season like you're planning to beat the Patriots, because it's going to be kind of hard to get to the Super Bowl without them, and that's the goal. I mean, the playoffs is nice, and God knows we would all love to see the Bills in the playoffs. But getting the playoffs is one thing when you're a wild card and you're happy to be there. But the plan is to go to the playoffs, win them, and go to the Super Bowl. And unless you can feel like you can beat the Patriots, that's part of it. That said, given what I pointed out earlier with the penalties, Taylor not playing particularly well, I think from my perspective, the thing that I was watching Taylor, it looks like a guy who's still on the practice field when he's taking some of those snacks. It feels like he's waiting for Chandler Jones to come up, two-hand touch, not touch him, and then oh shit, we've got to do the play again. But you just kind of, obviously I'm sure the coaches get on him in practice for that kind of thing. But to be fair, he's been doing it for 5 years of very little game action, lots of practice time where sacks don't hurt. And they certainly rarely affect your overall position in terms of the game, because you're just going to run whatever the next play is that you're trying to simulate in practice if you're on the scout team or whatever. So I would say that for Taylor, I think that he will mature a lot over the next 7 or 8 games. And I think that alone gives us a better shot in the Pats game. And I think, again, like Frank was pointing out, we can, and you've been pointing out, and I've been pointing out, we can win a lot of games on this schedule with Taylor playing even as well as he did the last 2 games, kind of more or less.
Yep. I think Henry disagrees with that assessment, but
he does. He's sleeping, but he still disagrees.
Right. As he's prone to do, because babies disagree with everything.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the earliest point you made, talking about beating the Patriots, I think I would agree. I think most Bills fans would agree that they wouldn't mind seeing us lose to the Patriots twice this year, as long as we beat them the 3rd time. That's kind of what we're striving for. But yeah, I largely agree with you, and especially you talked about Taylor, so I won't go into that aspect of it. This is possibly the best team in the NFL. If you believe power rankings, which you shouldn't, sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not, it is the best team in the NFL. And, they're a good measuring stick, and it's a good measuring stick to show that the Bills have a ways to go. But it's not like they went out at home against Jacksonville and laid this egg. They were facing the best. They were facing a team that was well prepared, well coached, has just an immense amount of talent, and
experience.
It's going to happen. So as far as the grand scheme of the season, like I said, I think they could win the next 7 games. I don't think they will, but I think that opportunity is there. And if you go into that and lose to the Patriots after the 10th game, you start the season 8-2, and hell yeah, you still have a chance to get to the playoffs despite that. So what it means in the grand scheme of the season, I will say it's a loss. It's a divisional loss. It's a loss to the Patriots. All of those are bad things, but it's a loss to the best team on your schedule. And it's also an early season loss to the trickiest opponent, which helped to expose all your weaknesses and gives you a chance to correct those weaknesses earlier. When you're exposed later in the season, it's almost worse, because that means you haven't had a time to work on those things in gel, and they're just going to be permanent problems. You've got to have a chance to fix your problems now that you're more aware of them up front, and that you haven't formed the bad habits that can lead to those problems persisting. So hopefully it doesn't mean that it's unless they go on a 14-game losing streak or a 15-game losing streak after this, I'm not too concerned about what it means in the grand scheme of things. So moving on and we'll transition on the Patriots here with a game captain in the game against the Patriots, a former Patriot, and now a former Buffalo Bill. Matt Castle, what are your thoughts on the trade to Dallas, Scott?
Anytime you can get the 5th round pick, you gotta make that move. I mean, it's just that simple. But yep,
you're saving $1.7 million. You're getting a 5th round pick for a 7th round pick. So really, what did you pay for Castle? 7th round picks. You're essentially trading 2 7th round picks for a 5th round pick. That's not a bad deal, and you're shaving 1.7 off. And for EJ Manuel, move him back up the depth chart, which is a nice reward for him after his preseason, and you're giving it to a guy that was not in your plans for this season. And I think someone commented on one of the blogs I was reading that was it Cortez who when they sailed to the Americas, had
Burned
his
the
entire
ships.
crew set the ships on fire and just say, just in case thinking of going back, there's no going back. So this is kind of the way of saying it, like Tyrod, Buffalo, you have no cushion now. We're going forward with you. And EJ, if something happens with Tyrod, it's you. There's no Kyle Orton to blame the mistakes on anymore. So I like the decision, as I pointed out on Twitter. Matt Castle leaves the Bills having taken one regular season snap, and he will go down as undefeated as a starting quarterback for the Buffalo Bills. So well done, Matt. It's tough to pull that off.
That is awesome, Paul. That is a very well timed, well played point. I did not think of that.
Thank you.
I guarantee. I'm not sure anyone else would have made that point. So thank you.
And I've only gotten one favorite on it. So people, come on, favorite my brilliance. It feeds my fragile, insecure ego.
Yeah, I was just gonna go. I was just gonna go on a tangent about you making that Cortez thing and spend 5 minutes talking about Hunt for Red October, because that was what Ramius did when he's explaining his plan to defect to the crew, and they're freaking out and they're saying, we got to go back. They're gonna find, I had to kill the political officer. Ramius had to kill the political officer, and they're gonna go back. And he says, I've already sent the letter to Admiral Podorin, so informing of him our intention to defect. And everyone freaks out, and he's like, when he got to the New World, Cortez burned his ships to, to, as you said, motivate his people. So again, tangent over.
Yeah, I'm glad we got it in there, though, especially because I didn't have my usual this day in Bills history. I would love to have a relevant reason, like, there just wasn't anything noteworthy or newsworthy. The bottom line is there's this gig, which I love, and then there's another job I have, which I get paid for. Yes. And so I had to focus today largely on the job it paid for. Couldn't find the usual 20 minutes or so at lunch to research it and go back in my memory bank and find some news clippings about the game and so forth to refresh my memory. So I apologize for that. But while we're on topic of former Bills quarterbacks, Ryan Fitzpatrick, starting quarterback, New York Jets.
Enough said. There it is. Todd Bowles announces it today, and everyone in New York kind of lets up a big huzzah as though the Fitz is the answer. And meanwhile, in upstate New York, everyone just keeps on laughing. Yep. Just a long chuckle to ourselves. Oh, those poor Jets fans. Well, no, screw them. They're Jets fans.
Screw the Jets fans. Though we did get along with them at the bar last week when they were playing Cleveland. But yeah, I watched the second half of that game last night, and I will say there are times that when the Bills started 5-2 that year, we were never sold on Fitz as the answer, but at the very least we thought, this guy can be good enough, and he's looked good enough for the Jets so far. What the issue has been for Fitz for the first 11 seasons of his career, sustaining that, carrying it through and through. And history shows that he will eventually make some costly mistakes at the end of the game that will hurt his team. But this is the thing, honestly, if it weren't the Jets, I would root for him to break that this year and be that guy who's leading his team. But it is the Jets, so I can't root for him. I think the Jets have made the right decision. I am now that much more upset with INNM Capelli for punching Geno Smith out, because otherwise the Jets would probably be 0-2 right now. So
well, to be fair, they at that point they would have probably put Fitz in anyway. So it's really probably a matter of time before Fitz was getting that job. But.
Right. I'll be interested if this were a Colts podcast. We'd have a lot to talk about too, because man, what a surprise, disappointment they've been so far this year.
Yeah, I
wonder what that means in the grand scheme of the Bills season, that this elite team they supposedly beat laid an egg at home against a team that was supposed to be number 4 in the division.
Absolutely running through my thoughts last night as I was watching the first half of the game, being like, maybe the Colts are terrible. But the good news is that at most, again, like you talk about who's on the division slate this year, AFC South terrible right now. I mean, again, like Jacksonville, good for them, they beat Miami, so that bodes well for us, but maybe they might be good. Bortles actually played pretty decent. And then obviously Tennessee, they beat I forget who they beat, the Bucs the first week with Mariota playing well, and then obviously they go out and lay an egg against the Browns, I think. So
and then Winston, who was buried the first week, all of a sudden beats New Orleans and knocks half of us out of the Survivor League.
Yeah, so it's the NFL, ladies and gentlemen. No one knows what the hell's going on. Congratulations. Yep. She explains the Survivor League.
Yes, you want to get into that? Trends in nicely. It's funny. That is next on our agenda, and I didn't even That was, man, I think I'm already beating Frank in terms of my segues. I think I'm a little more smooth on those than him.
Well, you
He's better
actually
in every other way, including it not taking him half an hour to figure out how to set up a damn Google Hangout on air. But regardless, I think I'll stick with my segues.
It does kind of ruin the segue, however, when you spend 5 minutes talking about how awesome the
Right.
segue was.
So now I've reverted back to a Frank segue. How perfect. So the Survivor League, number one, congratulations to Alcoholocaust, which I say aloud and I realize how bad that sounds.
Alcoholic come January is the official team name.
Okay.
I don't know what that means entirely, which is probably bad for, maybe we're too old. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be. Maybe it's a band. Regardless, one, who the hell are you? But congratulations, one, and two, who the hell are you? Because we're not sure. But
it's Inferno is the team owner.
Yeah.
So congrats to you, Inferno.
You outpicked all of us. We had many of us had New Orleans. I had New Orleans, even though I'd been officially knocked out before that because I didn't get my pick in on time. But regardless, I would have been knocked out anyway. So we've looked to relaunch.
Congrats on picking Arizona. We will relaunch the league. So what I will do is I will keep track of Alcoholicost's winning streak, because I feel like even though technically he's already won, to keep things fresh, we want to, have everyone else and enjoy their time in the Survivor League. So we're going to reset it. But I also feel like we shouldn't penalize Alcoholicost. So he will obviously get all of his teams reset. He can pick the same teams that everyone else can going forward, and we will see how long he can keep his streak going, and then that can be kind of the other prize. I mean, obviously, everyone who's a champion will kind of count those by the end of the year, but obviously who can keep the streak going the longest would be something interesting to find out too.
Right.
So
and I don't feel too bad for him because there's no prize at the end of this really anyway, at least not that we've discussed.
Yeah, we'll see what we can do. Maybe we'll give somebody some airtime or a blog post or something, or we'll talk about how awesome they are. But anyway, I'm resetting the group right now. So everyone will be back in it. Make those picks by Thursday night, remember.
Yep. Some of us weren't so good at that, Paul and Scott. So, remember to do that this week. I will try to do it tomorrow during the midst of a new episode of Law & Order SVU on NBC. So that wraps up the past, if you will, the past and the present. Business. It's time to look forward to the future in the Miami Dolphins. So this is going to be an interesting game. You remember last year was very evenly matched. The Bills jumped out to a good lead at home. The Dolphins persisted. The Bills broke their backs with the C.J. Spiller kick return for a touchdown. In Miami, the Bills did good at the beginning. Miami ended up jumping on top. The Bills took a questionable safety on a Kyle Orton intentional grounding, but they ended up getting a ball back in good field position, couldn't capitalize, and then the Dolphins just put the nail in the coffin in the second half. Two very well-matched teams. I'm expecting a very competitive game. I don't want to make the mistake of judging the teams on their last two games where the Bills defense was underperforming, got dominated, and had a home loss, or a Dolphins team that, oh my God, you lost to Jacksonville in week 2. These things happen. I think they're very similar teams. Question marks at quarterback. I'm sorry, Tannehill's a question mark at quarterback, Dolphin fans. Great defenses on the offensive line. Some interesting options at receiver. What are your thoughts on this game, Scott?
It's interesting. I mean, I think it would be, Miami, Brandon Albert, their left tackle, who they paid a lot of money to, left the game on Sunday against Jaguars with a hamstring injury. That could be potentially critical to keeping Tannehill upright. Though, if I recall, is Tannehill a lefty?
Jeez, I did their season preview. You think I would remember this? I'm actually. This is what professionals do, by the way, folks. They Google Ryan Tannehill and go to images and then see which hand he's throwing the ball with. So as I do that now, I can assure you he is right-handed.
He is right-handed, which having a proper left tackle will be.
Or in this picture against Jacksonville last week, he was throwing right-handed with his wrong hand, and that could explain why he did so poorly.
That's probably not going to win a lot of games in the NFL. So I think that could be a big injury. Obviously, if Cameron Wake has had some concussion problems, I'm confused. Is Deion Sims the one with the question mark?
I've got to look at the. I didn't
Anyway,
even look at the injury report.
I think we're going to beat Miami. I agree with Frank. Frank picked them.
Think it was 27-20.
27-20. I was going to head for the same score. I was going to take the Patriots 40 and the 0, or well, actually, the Colts did end up scoring what 12, 17 in that game.
I think just 7. Against the Bills, yeah, 17.
Yeah, so 17. So 17 and 40. That's well, actually, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to say the Dolphins score about 17. And I'll put the Bills at about 24. I think we can move the ball on this team. I like the way our offense is headed, even if Taylor did not have a great game last week. I think that the defense will play better. Lamar Miller also got hurt for Miami during last week's game, so even if he comes back, he's going to be a little banged up. And I think this is a Bills win. I mean, again, I picked us to lose this game early in the year, so I wouldn't be shocked if we did lose it. But I think I like the way we're playing. I'll pick the Bills.
Yeah, and I'll start off the lead as well. I'm gonna pick the Bills here too, and I've been right twice, which happens. That's usually my usual season average is being right twice about the games. So I think it's still gonna be a tough matchup up front. I think if the Bills try and go Carlos Williams up the middle all day, they're just gonna get buried. I think if they do the same with LaShawn, they're gonna get buried. I think they got to bring it out to the edge, but I think they can be effective that way. I think they can get Taylor out of the pocket a little bit more, which Brian Punt had alluded to in his comment. I think defensively, I think this is a very good matchup for Buffalo. I have never been sold on Tannehill, who's had one good game and about 6 tries against the Bills. I think they can have his number here. I think I'm kind of making an argument opposite of the one I made in Buffalo. I think the things that Jacksonville exposed are going to be things that Buffalo can take advantage of, whereas the things that New England exposed with Buffalo are things Buffalo can more readily fix. Again, save the offensive line. So kudos to that genius offensive line coach, Doug Marrone in Jacksonville, for helping give us a plan on how to keep Dolphins out of the backfield. But yeah, I think this is going to be a Bills victory in the end. I think we're going to be very happy next week. But that said, we're typically, no, I wouldn't say typically wrong. We're often wrong. So we'll find out.
We did again. We will figure out whether or not Frank ended up picking the Pats last week. I think he might have. I'm trying to remember. I feel like he picked the Bills, but anyway, frequently when we all pick the same team, we end up blowing it. So that could have just put the kiss of death on the Bills right there.
Right. We certainly did. I think that covers us, and we came in a little bit under an hour. I think this is going to end up at, so that's not bad. Of course, we only had 2 of us, not 3 of us, and unlike Frank, I run a tight ship here on the podcast. Of course, if we add in Frank's contribution audio-wise, that'll add it up. And of course, when I say we, I mean Frank, because Scott and I, again, I know Excel spreadsheets like that, but this is generally beyond my capacity. If you've enjoyed what you have heard, if you enjoy talking with us, B-Bills MNY, that's the website. You can Google Buffalo Bills podcast. We're going to be on that first page ahead of some of the what you might consider more renowned podcasts, and that's been that way because we've been doing this for years, and we've become
loyal listeners like you.
Yep, but we're the PBS essentially. So it's great having you. So again, twitter.com, BBillsMNY. That's where you're going to find me to interact with me during the course of the game and occasionally during the week, as I have commented yesterday and today. Facebook.com/BBillsMNY. That is where Scott hangs out. He typically does stuff there.
Mostly Frank.
Right, okay. It's mostly Frank. It was assigned to Scott, but he's blown it off. So
I definitely am.
But that's okay. We all interact on that as well. All 3 of us will chip in and say things on Facebook. I am overdue for my annual posting on the website. I will try and write something of relevance at some point. That is as much as I'm committing to that. So as always, it has been a pleasure interacting with you this week. We will try to make sure this podcast sees the light of day as soon as possible. We'll try and get it up on iTunes. And again, we being Frank. And just overall, I wanted to thank everyone for listening this week. Frank will be back next week. We'll fix any bugs that we have created without his absence. So until next week, I'm Paul.
I'm Scott.
See you guys later.